Hare Krishna devotees, very warm welcome to all of you for the last chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the longest chapter in the Bhagavad Gita. Although it is the longest chapter and has the most number of verses, nevertheless, we are going to try our best to quickly look at how the Bhagavad Gita concludes. For the most part, chapter 18 is a quick methodical summary by the Supreme Lord of everything that he has thus far instructed Arjuna on, with one small exception, which comes in Shloka 66 of the 18th chapter. So we talked about how in chapter 16, the Lord distinguishes between those who have divine qualities and those who have demoniac qualities who exist in this material cosmos. A simple way to understand is that the divine follow the scriptures, the demoniac do not follow the scriptures. So if you have the divine on one end of the spectrum and the demoniac on the other end of the spectrum of faith, what happens to people who kind of fall in between the two? That is the question that Arjuna asks in the 17th chapter. What about those who have faith, but their faith is not based on scriptures, but nevertheless they tend to practice rituals or other aspects of sacrifices, penances, and austerities? Where do they fall? That is Arjuna's question, because we do have people like that living with us. So the entire 17th chapter is in response to Arjuna's question about those who do not have faith in the Lord, who do not have faith in the scriptures. They have faith in something else. Faith in something else. And the Lord begins by responding that such faith is driven by the three modes, the three gunas, Sattvagun, Rajagun, and Tamogun. And in relation to these three gunas, the Lord talks again about the kinds of food one consumes or one is attracted to, the kinds of sacrifices one undertakes, the kinds of austerities that one performs, the kinds of charities that one gives, the kind of speech that one engages in, and then the Lord concludes the chapter by saying that faith is very, very critical, that without faith, anything that one undertakes, Krishna says, is asat. Sat means eternal. Asat means something that's not going to last long. In the sense, the results of such faith, there is no permanence in the results of such faith. So the chapter was titled Shraddhatraya Vibhaga Yoga. What about the faith that is driven by these three gunas? So we'll look at some past times before we come to chapter 18. Let's talk about faith. So Krishna says that if one has faith, if one's faith is influenced by the mode of goodness, such a person worships the demigods. If one's faith is influenced by the mode of passion, one worships the demons. And those who worship ghosts and spirits, they are actually exhibiting their faith under the influence of Tamogun. So there's one such story in the Ramayana. There was a man of laborer class called Shambhuka. So and there was also a Brahmana who had come to visit Lord Ram. Now outside the palace, there is a bell that anyone can ring if they want to meet the king, and they would always get an audience. So here the Brahmana has come and rung the bell outside the palace, requesting to meet Lord Ram. The Brahmana has brought his young son who is dead. Essentially, he experienced an untimely death. And in this case, the father has come to question the king. It is said that if the king is not dharmic, the citizens would experience difficulties in their lives. So the question was, Lord Ram's kingdom, how did it happen that a young boy lost his life in an untimely manner? So the Brahmana had come to ask that question. You are a dharmic king. How did this happen? That means something is wrong in your kingdom. So, of course, Lord Ram is very aggrieved to hear this. And it just so happens that Narada Muni comes to see Lord Ram. And he tells Lord Ram the problem, the cause of this untimely death of this Brahmana's son is because there is a Shudra in your kingdom by the name Shambhuka who is doing a great deal of austerity. And he is the cause of this untimely death. Saying that, Narada Muni leaves and Lord Ram begins to meditate. The Pushpaka Vimana comes. The Lord boards the Pushpaka Vimana and it comes to the place where the Shambhuka is performing austerities. The Lord asks this Shudra, who are you? And he responds by saying, I am Shambhuka, I am a Shudra. What kind of tapas are you doing here? So this Shambhuka was hanging upside down from a branch of a tree, doing tapas. Why are you doing this tapas? Well, I want to take the position of Indra. I want to defeat him and I want to throw him out, and then I will get to have his wife, Sachi. Lord Ram says, okay, and he immediately kills this Shudra. When Lord Ram reaches the palace, the young Brahmana's son is revived from death. He is alive again. So the Acharyas explain that what appears to be two unrelated activities, what the Shudra was doing versus this young boy's death, how fixing one problem fixed another immediately. So any adharmic activities in the kingdom has to be put to a stop by the king immediately. Otherwise, the rest of the citizens will be impacted due to the adharmic activities of others. Because we are talking about the Treta Yuga here. So tapas or austerity has to be done according to the scriptures. One cannot practice any austerity that is not authorized in the scripture. So the scriptures say that we don't have any right to torture our body. Our body is a gift from the Lord, and we should only accept and practice those austerities that are authorized in the scriptures. For example, observing an Ekadasi fast is an austerity. observing Chaturmas is an austerity. It's mentioned in the scriptures, and therefore you can observe it. But one cannot concoct one's own ways of practicing austerity in the hopes of getting some boon. Therefore, each one of us has a role to play in society. If society has to be peaceful and function smoothly, each of us must follow the scriptures. Now you can understand why Arjuna's question was, what about those who don't follow the scriptures? They just create some practices on their own, and they have faith in those practices, but not in the scriptures and not in the Supreme God. So when the Lord says that those who are in the mode of ignorance, they worship ghosts and spirits, bhuta and preta. What's the difference? If somebody commits suicide, they become a ghost or a bhuta. They are not given another physical body. However, because they still have the subtle body, they still will experience hunger, thirst, etc. The only difference is that they cannot act on it. Why? The physical body is missing. So what is a preta then? A preta is a transition body. So in our culture, when a person passes away, we observe 13 days, and on the 13th day is considered a celebration. Why do we celebrate on the 13th day? It's because on the 13th day, that soul gets a new body. So for those 12 days, the soul gets a transition body, and the rice balls and water that we offer acts as the food for that particular preta. So preta is a temporary body that you get until the soul enters the next body, which is on the 13th day. Now, this particular 13 days does not apply to devotees of Krishna. So if devotees of Krishna die, and if they have to take another birth, then they get a body immediately after the soul exits that body. That is the difference between how things happen and the differences in outcomes for those who are devotees of Krishna versus those who are not devotees. So for devotees, after day 1 of death, they take birth immediately. They enter a Vaishnava family. So the soul occupies the womb of a mother who is also practicing Krishna consciousness. Therefore, the Yamadutas do not have any jurisdiction over the devotees. Only the Vishnudutas have jurisdiction. Talking about Yamaraj. One day, Yamaraj sends his dhutas to go and get a person. What do you mean by go and get a person? Obviously, that person has to give up his body. That's when Yamadutas come. So to go and grab the person. So the Yamadutas come to that location that they have been given, but they don't find any house, let alone a soul. They can't even see a house. And they think, oh, we've traveled so far. Maybe there is a mistake on the map. Maybe there's a mistake in the location. So they go to the next door neighbor and take his body to Lord Yama. And Yamaraj gets a little upset. He said, I gave you a particular address and you went to the neighbor's house and picked up somebody else. And therefore the Yamadutas tell Yama Maharaj, but the address that you gave, there's no house there. So where can we find a person if there's not even a house? So Lord Yama was a little puzzled. So he decides to come and see for himself. What do you mean? The location is spot on accurate, but my servants are saying there's no house there. But definitely there is a soul that's residing in that particular location. So when Yamaraj comes to visit, he starts laughing. Why? Because there was a tulsi plant outside the house. The tulsi plant creates an aura of protection that subtle entities cannot see. So what to speak of protection from death? One of the reasons why we wear a tulsi mala around our neck, to let Yamadutas know, we don't belong to you. You're at the wrong address. So here, the Lord talks about different kinds of yajnas, different kinds of sacrifices, different types of charity. So one day, two thieves visit a Ganesha temple and they discuss among themselves. They make a deal. Whatever we steal, my dear Lord Ganesh, we will give you your share. So they were quite successful in their robbery, and as per their commitment to Lord Ganesha, they come. So what does the first thief do? Thank you, my dear Lord, for helping me. He draws a small circle on the ground and he tells the Lord, he tells Ganesha, I will throw my wealth into the air. Whatever falls in this big circle, he had actually drawn a very small circle, but whatever falls in this big circle that I have drawn, inside that circle, whatever is there, that will be yours. Whatever falls outside the circle is mine. So like this, he tossed all the money up in the air and only one coin fell inside that small circle. So that was Ganesha's share for helping them. At least that's what these two thieves thought, for helping them steal. The second thief was even more smarter. And he tells Lord Ganesha, I am actually not that stingy like that first thief. I will throw everything in the air. Whatever you catch, you keep. The rest is mine. So, of course, whatever he throws in the air falls down and he takes all of it with him. So one has to be very, very careful about our activities and our mood of worship, even to the demigods. So sacrifices also, Krishna says, has to be done as per the scriptures. Mantras have to be recited. The purohits have to be given appropriate dakshina. Prasadam must be distributed. And whatever sacrifices that one does, it has to be done with faith. And that's what Lord Krishna says. And then Krishna talks about speech, satyam priyam hitam. The importance of being truthful in everything that we speak, that whatever we speak must be pleasing and whatever we speak must be beneficial. So one day, a man speaks very harshly very harsh words to someone. And he later on realizes that he had accused this someone of doing something that he had actually not done. So he feels very bad about it. And he goes in search of a saint to ask, what should I do? What should I do? I mean, I've committed this blunder. I've accused somebody of doing something that they never did. So the wise man tells him, he gives him a pillow full of feathers, and he tells him, do something, take this pillow out into the middle of a town, cut it open, and let the feathers fly all over the place. So the man very respectfully follows the instructions of this holy man, and he comes back to him and says, okay, so now what? I didn't understand why you asked me to do that. So the holy man tells him, well, now what I want you to do is I want you to go back into town, collect all the feathers, wherever they may be, put it back in the bag, and come and bring it back to me. So the man gets quite annoyed. He says, what kind of nonsense activity is that? How can I even hope to collect all the feathers? Because by now all the feathers have flown in the wind and they've gone here and there. And the holy man tells him, well, whatever harsh words you've spoken, it's already gone here and there. Rumors have spread. It didn't stop just with you speaking. Others picked it up. It's gone here and there. It's too late. You cannot put it back in that bag. So when it comes to our speech, we must be extra, extra, extra cautious of how we choose to speak. If we speak, we should speak the truth, but it should be pleasing. It should be done in a pleasing manner. And most importantly, whatever we are speaking, it should be beneficial to the other person. If what we are about to say is not beneficial to the other person, then it is better not to speak. Then Krishna talks about charity. Charity has to be given at the proper place, at the proper time, to a worthy individual. If it is not done as per that, then that charity is also going to have binding karmic reactions on you. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the Srimad Bhagavatam how charity actually works, both in this life and in the next life. So let us say I give charity to somebody who is not worthy of receiving charity. If I give that person, say, 100 rupees, then I will get a reward of 100 rupees or an equivalent reward in my next life. So 1:1. If I give a charity to a somewhat worthy person, say half a Brahmana, then your reward doubles, 1:2. If you're given 100 rupees, you'll get a reward of 200 rupees in your next life. I'm just giving an equation. It doesn't mean you literally will get 200 rupees. If you give charity to a qualified Brahmana, then the ratio goes up to 1:1,000. So if you've given 1 rupee in charity, you'll get 1,000 in return. But the charity has to be given to a qualified Brahmana. There is another interesting perspective. If you give charity to a devotee of the Lord, one who is a self-realized soul, the equation is 1:infinity. You give 1 rupee, there's never-ending reward for you. Never-ending, ever-growing reward. So the benefits are unlimited when you give in charity to a devotee or to a Vaishnava who is serving the Lord. That's why the Lord talks about Kala, Desha, and Patra. Time, place, and circumstance matters when you give in charity. So charity doesn't mean you just adopt a particular organization, there's nothing in the Shastra that says anything about giving charity for that particular aspect that that organization may be supporting or helping. So even when we give charity, it has to be as per scriptures, to the right person, at the proper time, at the proper place. Of course, it has to be done with faith. So the entire chapter concludes with Krishna saying, the trajectory of the chapter, towards the end of the chapter, Krishna is talking about those who are faithless, they are completely materialistic. And then after that comes those who have faith but not in scriptures. So those who don't have faith versus those who have faith but not in the scriptures. Then after that comes those who have faith in the scriptures. They follow the scriptures. And the highest category is those who have faith in the Supreme Lord Krishna. And they live their lives according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, Krishna says, Om Tat Sat. Anything you do with this as your primary mood, Om means you're invoking the presence of the Supreme Lord. Tat means you are saying that there is a higher reality beyond you, the Paramatma, the Absolute. And Sat means eternal. So when you invoke these three words, Om Tat Sat, then any sacrifices, austerities, penances, and charity that you do will be worthy of spiritual rewards. So when it comes to philosophy versus practice, Krishna is not interested in how well you have understood the philosophy. Krishna is more interested in how well you are practicing it. So practice is very important to Krishna. Whether you've understood the scriptures or not, of course, if you've understood it, it is great. But if you've not understood it, but you are practicing the instructions of the acharyas, then that is quite sublime. So, which means how a person lives is more important to Krishna than what they believe in. You can believe in anything that you want. Krishna is evaluating you based on your practices. So your life must exemplify a value system that is actually based on the scriptures. So this is the importance of this particular chapter. So some of us may say, you know, I have friends, or I have colleagues, or I have family members who never visit the temple, who don't worship, who don't have a puja room at home, who don't believe in going to the temple, who think all of these are just some silly little rituals that the rest of society seems to be preoccupied with. And you may also say, this person doesn't believe in God, but he's humble. He's very good to other human beings. He's kind. He's compassionate. So there's no connection between the two. So we shouldn't think being an atheist, being a non-believer, automatically gives you those qualities. So it's not that one is an atheist and therefore they have developed these good qualities. It's their past karma and upbringing that have not only shaped their views on religion, but it has also impacted how they conduct themselves in this life. So His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu gives a beautiful analogy to explain this. So assume there are two different car drivers. One driver is an expert car driver, but he's just driving without any destination in mind. Then you have another driver who's just a horrible driver. He drives in a very messy fashion, but he has a destination in mind. So who is better? The really good car driver without a destination, or the messy car driver with a destination? And Chaitanya Prabhu says, if you look at it in the long term, the messy driver who has a destination in mind has a better chance of succeeding because he has a destination in mind. Meaning to say, if the destination is based on scriptures, and even if you drive messily, which means even if you live an imperfect life, you're on the right path. Versus someone who is an expert driver, but because he has no faith, he's driving smoothly, he's got wonderful skills, but he has no destination. Where is he going to? So which is better? The person who has a particular purpose in life and has a destination. The destination, of course, is linked to discovering the supreme absolute truth. To begin with, to have faith in scriptures. If one doesn't have faith in Krishna, then one should at least have faith in the scriptures. So one day Prabhupada was asked, Prabhupada, how do we know your followers? And Prabhupada very quickly said, they are perfect gentlemen and ladies. That's how you know they are my disciples. Prabhupada didn't say, oh, my disciples, they wake up at 3:30 in the morning. They shave their heads. They don't eat meat. They don't drink alcohol. They don't drink tea and coffee. That's not what Prabhupada said. Prabhupada said the way you recognize my followers is they're perfect gentlemen and ladies. But that perfection comes from following the scriptures and instructions of Acharya. So the world ultimately cares for how you behave. Of course, there is a deeper significance behind this. So a devotee has to have a very strong ideological foundation as much as they have to have a functional foundation. So people ultimately are attracted by our conduct. And oftentimes they get asked this question. And I'm trying to get my mother, my sister, my grandfather, whoever to chant. Why are they not interested? Why don't they want to do it? Well, first let them observe your conduct and let them be inspired by your conduct. It's very, very difficult to preach to one's own family members because they know you inside out. So you cannot fool them. So to develop that kind of trust, you have to have exemplary conduct at home. Right? So ultimately, people value you based on your own conduct and your behavior. So this entire chapter was about those individuals who have faith. They are not necessarily demoniac. They are not necessarily divine. They fall somewhere in between. They have some faith on something other than the scriptures or in the Supreme Lord. So what is the destination for such people is the question. Or what is the position of such people is the question that Arjuna asks, which brings us to the 18th chapter. So the 18th chapter is called Sannyasa Yoga. It's a lengthy chapter, but we are going to go through the slides in a very quick fashion because most of this we have heard earlier. So chapter title is Moksha Sannyasa Yoga, and the single word summary for the 18th chapter is surrender. So let's offer our most humble obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So the acronym for today is SMILE. SMILE, it's the last class, but perhaps the beginning of your journey if you've been joining these classes for the first time, you're hearing about the 18 chapters. So Krishna begins by summarizing Karma Yoga. He talks about the 3 gunas again, almost 21 shlokas. He talks about the 4 varnas and the ideal work that each of them should be undertaking. What does love of God really mean? 10 shlokas on that. And it concludes with what's the result of those who are actually listening to this Bhagavad Gita. So the acronym is SMILE. Let's quickly run through the slides. Chapter 18 again begins with a question that Arjuna has already asked earlier. So Arjuna's question is, O mighty armed one, I wish to understand the purpose of renunciation, Tyaga, and of the renounced order of life, Sannyasa. O killer of the Keshi demon, master of the senses. So Arjuna is asking, what's the difference between those who renounce results versus those who take the renounced order of life? What's the difference between a sannyasi and maybe a brahmachari or a grihastha who's given up the results of their work? And what is Krishna's response? The giving up of activities that are based on material desire is what great learned men call the renounced order of life. So sannyasa means you give up your family, you give up your bank account, you give up your clothes, you give up your wealth, you lead an austere life. So the giving up of activities that are based on material desire is what great learned men call the renounced order of life, sannyasa. So who is a tyagi then? Giving up the results of all activities is what the wise call renunciation, which means you're still in the material world, you're operating in this material cosmos, you're in your different ashramas, but you actually give up the results of your activities. Such a person is called a renunciate, a tyagi. So Krishna comes back to the topic of sacrifice, charity, and penance. Yajna, dhana, and tapa. And what is Krishna saying? Great men have said that acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance should never be abandoned, which means all of us have to do these 3 things for the rest of our life. Now Krishna is saying, learned people like great sages have said this. And then Krishna is going to give his opinion. So he says, now hear my judgment about renunciation. O tiger among men, renunciation is declared in the scriptures to be of 3 kinds. So acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up. They must be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great souls. So Krishna is saying, even if you are a sannyasi, even if you're a great acharya, you still have to do these 3 things: sacrifice, charity, penance. In the next shloka, Krishna says, all these activities should be performed without attachment or any expectation of result. They should be performed as a matter of duty. So yajna, dana, tapa. All of us have to perform it as a matter of duty. And Krishna says, that is my final opinion. Prescribed duties should never be renounced. If one gives up his prescribed duties because of illusion, such renunciation is said to be in the mode of ignorance. Anyone who gives up prescribed duties as troublesome or out of fear of bodily discomfort is said to have renounced in the mode of passion. Such action never leads to the elevation of renunciation. O Arjuna, when one performs his prescribed duty only because it ought to be done and renounces all material association and all attachment to the fruit, his renunciation is said to be in the mode of goodness. So let's come back to the slides and we'll quickly run through. So now you know how the chapter begins. It begins with Arjuna asking his question about the difference between a sannyasi and a tyagi. So we've understood the difference. We'll go through the rest of the slides. I'm going to skip some of the technical slides because we will not have time to discuss that in detail. Krishna says, one who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled, though he kills men in this world, does not kill, nor is he bound by his actions. So Krishna says, if you're motivated by false ego, if I do this, that will happen. If I do that, maybe something else will happen. Whose intelligence is entangled, you're too confused to figure out what is the right decision to make. So Krishna is saying, if you're just steady in mind and your motivation is pure, it's dharmic, even though you may kill men in this world, Krishna says such a person does not kill. And because he does not kill, he is not bound by his actions. Which means all activities, if they are justifiable for the sake of protection of dharma, then one is not reap the consequences of such activities, even though it may seem to be heinous activities. Krishna explains for the first time in this chapter that oftentimes we think we are the doers, but we are not the sole doer. There is an ultimate controller. Remember, we said in one of the slides in the Secrets of Gita Reveal program, that the Lord is the supreme controller, but he's not the sole controller, S-O-L-E. Even the Jivatma is trying with his minimal amount of freedom to try to control things in life. So the Lord is a supreme controller, but not the sole controller. But here, ultimately, the Lord is the cause of everything. Sarvakarana Karanam. Such a person who knows does not get entangled. So now in the next section, Krishna is going to talk about Sattvagun, Rajagun, and Tamagun, but this time in the context of knowledge, in the context of activities, in the context of the level of determination, their view of happiness, their understanding of life, their philosophy. So Krishna says, sees everything as same, spirit, soul, and absolute. That's in the mode of goodness. Which means when you see everybody, you see not just the Jivatma, but also the Paramatma residing within them. And therefore, there is no difference between the Paramatma and the Jivatma, because the Jivatma anyway belongs to Paramatma. That's in the mode of goodness. In the mode of passion, we see distinctions. That's a cockroach. This is a butterfly. So I'll bring a spray to kill the cockroach, but I enjoy the butterfly, I will not harm it. It's so beautifully colored and wonderful, beautiful design and imprints. So this is saying that the soul is different because the body is different. So because I don't like this body, I refuse to see the soul in it. I like this kind of body, so I acknowledge the soul in it. So this is duality. What about ignorance? You are attached to one kind of work as all in all, which means you are just chasing things on a material platform. What about activities? Where if you are in the sattva gun, you definitely follow certain rules and regulations. You have established certain rhythms in your daily life. There are certain things you will do. There are certain things you will avoid. So your entire life tends to be regulated. Also, any duty and activity that you perform, you do it neither with love or hatred, you do it out of a sense of duty. And a higher level is to not even be attached to the results of those activities. And whatever you do, Krishna says, if you do it with a great deal of determination and enthusiasm, it demonstrates that you are under the influence of sattva. Passion, well, everything that you do, you're doing it to satisfy your senses. You become very attached to the work and also the fruits of work. And therefore, it leads to greed, envy, and impurity. And therefore, you experience great amount of duality in the form of joy one minute, sorrow another. And in the mode of ignorance, it's performed in illusion, without regard for scriptural injunctions, Krishna says. And because you're not worried about the scriptures, you're equally not worried how you're tying yourself up in the future. You have simply spoiled your next life by disregarding the scriptures. You have guaranteed a very difficult life, perhaps in a completely different physical body than that of a human being. So Krishna says those in Tamogun, they operate out of illusion. They don't care for the scriptures, and therefore they don't care what their next life is going to be. They are unconcerned. And because they are unconcerned, they may engage in violence and cause distress to other jivatmas, other human beings as well. And because they don't care for the scriptures, their activities are not aligned. They engage in cheating. They are expert in cheating others. What about understanding? Krishna says in Sattva Gun, you have a clear picture of what's right and what's wrong. Where, in what situation should you be fearful, and in what situation should you be brave? What kind of activity is going to bind you? What kind of activity is going to liberate you? But Krishna says if you are in Rajagun, you don't even know how to figure out what is religion and what is religion, because you're so conflicted about just chasing things. Therefore, you don't know what should be done and you don't know what should not be done. What about those in Tamogun? Well, they consider religion to be religion and irreligion to be religion. So they just switch everything around, diametrically opposite. They are under the spell of illusion and darkness, and Krishna says they are always moving in the wrong direction. What about determination? Krishna says those in Sattva Gun, they are steadfast. You cannot shake them easily. And thus they have learned to control their senses and their mind, and therefore their life itself. But if you are under Rajagun, then you are interested in economic development and religion only for the sake of satisfying your senses. If you're under Tamogun, well, you are always in dream state, or you may be lamenting, or you're morose, or you're fearful, or you're in complete illusion. So these are all shlokas from the 18th chapter. These are the words that Krishna is using. What about happiness? Krishna says those who engage in activities that may seem very, very detestable in the beginning, the results seem to be very difficult. For example, if we say wake up at 3:30 in the morning, Oh, that seems like very difficult to do. And your mind protests, why should I do that? What's the big deal? Why can't I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning? So Krishna is saying, what may be very difficult for us to do in the beginning, once we conquer it, it's like nectar. And such a person ultimately comes to the path of self-realization, which means you're willing to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. Whereas if you're in Rajasic, if your nature is Rajasic, Krishna says you're always chasing everything because everything looks beautiful, attractive, and you're just tempted by it. But once you taste it, it's like everything is poisonous. So what seems very attractive in the beginning, Krishna says the Rajasic person curses it. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Because they end up in a very, very conflicted situation. Why? Because they are simply chasing material desires. If you're in a mode of ignorance, Krishna says your happiness is completely born of illusion. Your happiness is based on how much you can sleep, how lazy you can be, and being completely detached from reality, in delusion. So who is the ideal worker? So we're going to come to that section of the 18th chapter. So Krishna talks about the 4 varnas and ideally what is their duties. At the end of the day, how do we achieve perfection through work? And how do we attain the Supreme Lord? So Krishna talks about Brahmanas. He talks about the 9 qualities of the Brahmanas: peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. How do you identify a Brahmana? They have to have these 9 qualities. Brahmana doesn't mean you have a Brahmin thread. Brahmana really means you have these qualities in you, with or without the thread. So, peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. Kshatriyas. What are their qualities? What tells you that somebody is a Kshatriya? Heroism, power, determination, resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, and leadership. These are the qualities that Kshatriyas demonstrate. And that's why they are in positions of administration. They have that can-do attitude. Vaishyas, Krishna says they should engage themselves in farming, cow protection, and any other business-related activities. What about the Shudras? Krishna says they are primarily meant to serve the other 3 varnas. Remember, we said they should not look for honor or a higher stature in life, because they're meant to serve others. Perfection through work. So Krishna says the perfect way to work is whatever you do it for the pleasure of Krishna. In whichever varna you are in, Krishna says, if you work for me and my pleasure, then I consider you to be a perfect worker. This is a shloka that's very important. So how do you get connected to the Supreme Lord? Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yaschasmitat tatpatah tato mam tatpato jnatva vishate tadanantaram. Krishna is saying, one can understand me as I am. Bhaktya mam abhijanati, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by bhakti, only by devotional service. And And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. So Krishna is saying, if you're not my devotee, you cannot understand me. When you're in full consciousness of me, when you see me everywhere and in everything, by your devotion, Krishna says you can come back to me. So there is a ray of hope for all of us that by learning to love the Supreme Lord, we can ultimately learn to surrender. So we have to learn to depend on Krishna. We have to follow the principles of what is established in the Bhagavad Gita, but do so under the guidance of a spiritual master. And every activity that we perform should be done while remembering Krishna. And what is the result? Krishna gives you personal protection. He helps you pass over all the obstacles in life, and he personally takes you back to your original home in the spiritual world. So this chapter single word summary is based on this particular verse. There is a lot written on this one verse by many acharyas. What does this really mean? Sarva dharman parityagya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Krishna is saying, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. Krishna is saying, he will personally deliver you from your karmic reactions. He can also change your prarabdha karma in this life. And Krishna is saying, do not fear. When Krishna says abandon all varieties of religion, what he means is that when there is a conflict between one dharma and another dharma, generally, when there is a conflict between one dharma and the other dharma, you have to understand which is the higher dharma. And then take your actions according to that higher dharma. But when one is not clear, even then Krishna says the topmost dharma is that you are surrendered to me. So, my dear Arjuna, you do not have to worry about making a choice between protecting my family and protecting the kingdom. That's not the choice you need to make. The choice is, have you surrendered to me and will you work for my pleasure? That's the only choice to make. Therefore, Krishna is saying, abandoning all varieties of religion. Just surrender to me, Krishna says. If you surrender to my will, then I take control of your life. You don't have to worry. Now, this does not mean you deliberately say, I am surrendered to Krishna and do whatever you want. No, that's not it. All Krishna is saying, when you've taken my shelter, there's nothing you have to fear. Lead your life, do everything to please me, and I'll take care of things. You don't have to worry. Do not fear, ma suchaha. So Krishna is saying, mam ekam sharanam raja. He's not saying take the shelter of anybody that you like. Krishna is saying take shelter only of me. He's commanding. He's telling you what he wants you to do. So surrender only to Krishna, and then you will get that transcendental peace. You will achieve that supreme eternal abode, and you will be freed from all sinful reactions because Krishna personally wipes it out. So this entire chapter concludes with Krishna talking about who can actually receive this knowledge and what are the benefits of distributing this knowledge, studying this Bhagavad Gita, listening to the Bhagavad Gita, and all supreme auspiciousness that Sanjaya talks about. So, who can receive this knowledge? Krishna says only his devotees can receive this Bhagavad Gita. You have to be non-envious of the Lord, you have to be a friend of the Lord, and you have to be regulating your activities. So these themes were repeated earlier in the Bhagavad Gita of being amanitvam, adambitvam, of being his devotee, being his friend. When the devotee surrenders, Krishna gives freedom. So Krishna says, thus I have explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do. So after this lengthy conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, Krishna says, I have answered your questions. Contemplate on what I have said and then act accordingly. So even now, Krishna is allowing Arjuna to exercise his free will. So sometimes we get asked this question, why does Krishna not stop evil activities? He's not happy about evil activities. But if you insist on being disobedient, then Krishna watches you. And of course, we will pay a price for that. But he does not force you to obey him. Because if he were to force you to obey him, then you wouldn't call him God, you would call him a dictator. So Arjuna says, my dear Krishna, O infallible one, my illusion is now gone. I have regained my memory by your mercy. I am now firm and free from doubt, and I'm prepared to act according to your instructions. This is full surrender. So what is Arjuna saying? I was delusioned in chapter 1. That disillusionment has gone. I lost my memory in the first chapter. And by your mercy, my dear Lord, I have regained my memory. What is my memory? I am your servant. I have to serve you first. Not my family. Service to Krishna first is service to family and society. I am now firm and free from doubt, and I'm prepared to act according to your instructions. Final submission by Shishya to Guru. Whatever Guru says, you will act accordingly. So Krishna says, Ya idam paramam guhyam madbhaktesh abhidhashyati bhaktim mai param kritva mame vaishyati asamshayah. For one who explains the supreme secret to the devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed. And at the end, he will come back to me. So Krishna is saying, those who preach the Bhagavad Gita to others who are receptive to receive this knowledge, they are guaranteed to get Krishna Prema. And they are guaranteed to go back to Krishna. Earlier in the day, we had an orientation session on Bhakti Shastri and Bhakti Vaibhav. So those who really like the scriptures should follow the instructions of the acharyas and study the scriptures for the purposes of preaching. Because Krishna considers his preachers to be his dearmost devotees. More dear to him, he says, than anybody else. But let's say you like studying the Bhagavad Gita, but you're not ready to preach. You don't want to preach. Krishna says, I accept this also. I accept that you're worshipping me with your intelligence. Well, what if I can't study the Bhagavad Gita? I just want to listen because I have faith in the scripture. Krishna gives you benefit just for listening to the Bhagavad Gita. Just for hearing pravachan. What is Krishna giving you in return? You are freed from sinful reaction and you will go to the auspicious planets. So, one is your karmic reactions are gone, or rather your papa is destroyed. And because only punya is remaining, Krishna sends you to the upper planetary system so you can enjoy yourself. That is just for listening to Bhagavad Gita classes. What to speak of studying, and then what to speak of studying and then preaching. Then this very famous shloka, Yatra Yogeshwarah Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdharaha, Tatra Shrir Vijayo Bhutihi, Dhruvani Tirma. So Sanjay is saying, wherever there is Krishna, the master of all mystics, and wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. That is my opinion. So with that, we come to the conclusion of this 18 days, 18 chapters. And let's look at the summary slides once again. So we discussed this last section of the Bhagavad Gita called Jnana Yoga. Begins with Krishna saying, I know you're in jail. I'm ready to become your attorney if you will allow me to help you. And I'm going to tell you what kind of jail you're living in. Well, this jail has 3 bars. These 3 bars are the 3 gunas. Sattva gun, Rajagun, and Tamogun are holding you back here. Well, if you don't want me as your attorney, then I can only say, follow the Vedic scriptures. I've given you a manual to follow. So if you follow the Vedas, that's your escape plan to get out of this prison. And while you're in this prison, Krishna says, be careful about your inmates. Because if you associate with the demoniac, or if you nourish your demoniac qualities, then your sentence is lengthened. What kind of sentence? You have to take birth again and again and again and again and again. So Krishna is saying, you have divine and demoniac qualities within you, and also there are divine and demoniac qualities all around you. You please cultivate your divine qualities and spend time with divine people so that you can cultivate those divine qualities. And ultimately, those demoniac qualities should fall away. But everything that you do, Krishna tells Arjuna, has to be done with faith. If you don't do it with faith, then it becomes asat. It's of no use, Krishna says. So the key is faith. But the highest level of truth is one who can completely surrender to Krishna and not worry about whether this dharma is conflicting with that dharma, or that dharma is conflicting with another dharma. These things one can get guidance. Sometimes some dharmas supersede other dharmas because it is apparently contradictory in Vedic scriptures as to what is actually taking priority. But by consulting a senior devotee, you can sort this out. But the ultimate conclusion, Krishna says, is no dharma matters except for the dharma that you know you are my servant. And the minute you know you're my servant, what will you do? You will surrender to me. What will I do when you surrender to me? I will protect you. I will wipe out your sins. I will make sure you come back to me. I will help you come back to me, Krishna says. So that's the final conclusion of the 18th chapter. So the difference between, what's the difference between a sannyasi and a renunciate? Krishna says no difference. They are both equally good. And then Krishna talks about the motivation and the actual doer, the super doer being the super soul. Coming back to the three gunas, how does that impact your knowledge, your activities, the work, your determination, how you view happiness? Who's an ideal worker as per the four varnas? And the best thing to do is to work for Krishna and nobody else. And this way you can achieve Krishna Prema by simply surrendering to Krishna. Who cannot receive this knowledge? Anybody who is envious and not a friend of Krishna. Anybody who distributes this knowledge, Krishna says, is very, very dear to him. One who studies this knowledge, Krishna says, is worshipping him with his intelligence. One who's only listening, but listening with faith, Krishna says, well, I take away all of their papa, and because only punya is left, they travel to the upper planetary systems. And the supreme auspiciousness of anybody who hears this conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, the results is all auspiciousness, prosperity, and morality. So with that, we come to the conclusion of our 18-day session. Thank you very much for joining us. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhu evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo